Hi all, I have an absolutely classic game to show you today. Herman Pilnik against Miguel Najdorf, played in the 1942 Plata tournament. So this is round 13. This extraordinary game has been featured in several books. Chernev has used this as a great game example in The Bright Side of Chess. Ruben Fine in Chess Marches On. Vukovic in The Art of Attack. And this amazing online interactive edition of The Art of Attack features tons of great commentary by Ginger GM, well worth checking out at Kingscrusher TV/Art of Attack. Okay, so these major Argentinian plays, both of them, by the way, kind of emigrated from other countries. Yeah, there was quite a lot of turmoil and darkness in the world at the time. So this is in the middle of World War II. If you want to read about both players, I'd encourage you to check out their wiki to get an idea of some of the things they had to go through. So anyway, Herman Pilnik kicked off with the white pieces with e4, and actually Najdorf doesn't play the Najdorf on this occasion. He plays the Caracal defense. We have d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, and the main line is usually bishop f5, but we get here a very dynamic, interesting move, offering a direct trade-off of a pawn structure versus piece activity and perhaps king safety. It's a very interesting structure. Knight takes f6 check is played, e takes. This automatically also opens up the bishop for development. And personally, I'm pretty insecure with white actually in blitz and bullet in this in this variation. So this is why actually I picked this. I thought maybe I can get some ideas. The thing is, okay, we've doubled the pawns, but actually black's got a lot of pressure here. Black's got the semi-open file pressure. This file is now shared. These pawns kind of make the opponent's king safer. So if you want to attack the king, maybe it's going to be more difficult sometimes. There's an extra pawn over there. White's got a pawn majority on this side of the board, clearly, the 4-2-3. But, and also, furthermore, this pawn could be useful sometimes for f5, to go to f5 and then control the e4 square. So in practice, this is actually rather tricky for white. We have this move c3, okay, which stabilizes d4 for a bit, bishop d6, and you can immediately see also there's a certain uncomfortableness on this diagonal as well. Sometimes black can seemingly play very, very natural moves in this position, like later, like this, and maybe put the knight in on g6 and really start controlling these dark squares. So this variation has become pretty popular actually in recent years, and there's interest being expressed apparently by David Hell in playing black side, and he thinks it's very, very interesting apparently. So what does white play here anyway? White did play bishop d3. The thing is, this is the major move actually. If you play knight f3, you say goodbye to any opening advantage immediately. I mean immediately. I think I have been playing this unfortunately, because black really has almost like zero problems after knight f3. For example, black castles, bishop e2, rook e8. So basically, there's the shared file and black's got the pressure to pile up later on d4, as well as a safer king and other dynamic prospects. So say white castles knight d7, rook e1, knight f8 as I mentioned earlier, and then coming to g6 for example, it just looks as though black's the one with a really fun position and controlling even that f4 square. It looks kind of unpleasant actually, but technically it's equal. So the main move is actually bishop d3 here. So black castles, and here the main move nowadays tends to be queen c2. This reserves the right. The knight can sometimes come to e2, and white can reserve the right to castle queenside, try and encourage black's pawns to weaken a bit further, and maybe h4, h5 later. This may be the right way to play this. Queen c2 in theory, but here we have a very, very interesting novel move which online players might find interesting, or just club players. It's a very, very novel move played here actually, very direct. We actually see, instead of queen c2, we see queen h5. So the game's really caught my imagination at this point on move 8, Queen h5. As an example of a high-level game with Queen c2, for example, Queen c2, check, and here Bishop e2, Bishop e3 rather, has been played as in Svidler against Magnus Carlsen, believe it or not, in the Porto Carras 2018 tournament. And yeah, Magnus used this with the black pieces, so it can't be that bad with black if it's a choice of Magnus Carlsen. You can see the dark square play, the f4, as I mentioned, is pretty nasty stuff, potentially. Anyway, Magnus equalised there, it seems, and drew in 58 moves. So you have to be very, very careful with this variation. So interesting, Queen c2, but Queen h5, super interesting now, territory, even from an opening theoretical perspective. It does encourage black here to play a weakening move. g6 is chosen. Now, there's various interpretations of this game example. We've got increases in computer technology to analyze it. We've also got different books analyzing it, different authors. And you know what? I think it's important to gather the questions. It doesn't matter if the question was posed in 1950. It's the questions which, for me, for analyzing these examples, for you to provide the best answers later in later generations. The questions are always going to be interesting. They're going to stand the test of the time. So there's a question here about g6. Is it good? Is f5 better? These are very interesting questions which have been discussed by numerous authors, in fact. f5 has been sometimes mentioned as maybe better. It sets an immediate trap, by the way. If bishop takes f5, g6. So what does white do? If knight e2, rook e8, this position, the queen seems to be kicked back, and it should be about even. There should be no real problems, perhaps, for black. So g6, anyway, was played. And we see a slight weakening of the dark squares. We see the queen going to h4. The queen on h4 is very, very interesting. There's a more stable centre. The queen's actually guarding d4 sometimes. It's looking at f6. It's looking at the dark squares in general. It's looking at h6 sometimes. So the bishops want to coordinate with the queen. And maybe black does feel this frontal pressure is worth building on. And this next move came with some criticism from Vukovic originally. But put this into modern computers, and they don't see anything that bad about it. I think Vukovic believes that black's strength is this extra pawn on the king side and the opportunities that could generate. For example, bishop e7 could be a tempo gain for f5, bishop f6, or maybe even use f6 for a knight coming via d7 to f6 to e4 later with rook e8. There are various ideas to use this extra pawn on the king side, and this move was given quite harsh criticism as a sort of fundamentally inappropriate move to play. Well, it really depends on the position. I don't think even, the extra pawn on the king side doesn't immediately mean the golden rules of having to use them apply. I mean, I think there is some issue with d4 sometimes. So it seems a rather playable move objectively from a scientific perspective. Knight d7 has been recommended though by others. For example, knight e2, bishop e7, to trying to use this extra pawn over here. So queen g3, f5. The thing is here, for example, this is tricky. The timing here, white isn't yet committed to castling, so maybe h4 is dangerous. And then h5, this is dangerous. So black has to be a little bit careful about how to go about this. It's not that easy to, if white retains the option of using the h-pawn, this bishop e7 plan to kick the queen is actually doing white a favour for h4, h5. So there's trickiness associated with knight d7. Maybe, black can sometimes flick in a key waiting move, get white to castle, and then this will work much better than this plan. But anyway, c5 was played here, and it came in with some criticism. We have knight e2, knight c6, and then we have bishop h6. And here, black adds to his collection of weaknesses by playing move f5. So disregarding the attack on the rook, it's hitting the queen. So it's an encouraging exchange of queens, but it does create some weaknesses. Perhaps some have argued rook e8 is interesting here. Rook e8. And if, for example, d takes, bishop takes, the queen's glaring down at d3 here, rook d1, bishop d7. Okay, this kind of position, maybe white's got a small edge though. The d5 square seems a bit vulnerable. Double pawn seems a bit miserable there. Maybe white's doing okay there. So, but rook e8 has been suggested maybe as an alternative to f5. It does create some more weaknesses. We can get a potential fawn bishop, a fawny bishop potentially, rerouting. That's a real risk factor. So we have actually bishop g5 immediately here. Now queen b6 was played. Let's rule out a few things here, or check out a few things. If f6, maybe the bishop just goes back, and then white can castle queenside, and on c takes, knight takes. This position, white has a significant advantage. If bishop e7, then bishop takes, knight takes, white castles queenside. This is probably the best move. D takes c5 has been mentioned, I think by Vukovic himself, and after queen takes e7. In fact, black is okay after bishop e6. White has difficulties because of that knight. How does white actually operate here? Maybe queen d6 is a clever move using the c5 pawn, but then queen b5 is annoying, and if white is sacking b2, it's black that might have a small edge. So in fact, the way to play it here on this line, bishop e7, is probably to castle queenside. That's better than d takes. And if bishop e6 here, d takes now, and this should be a small edge for white. So okay, bishop e7, seems almost, it's plausible. It's plausible. So anyway, queen b6 was played, which adds further pressure to that d4. So black, Miguel Najdorf, is putting his investments into undermining the center here, the d4 square, try and refute white's attacking ambitions by crumbling the center. And he's looking at b2 as well. Now here, this is really instructive stuff now. White actually just ignores the attack on b2 and castles. And we have actually c takes d4 before doing anything else, c takes, and now rook e8. If queen takes b2 here, it turns out, this looks like a poison pawn here. It's a classic poison pawn, and maybe it is, because these tempo gainers means that this rook can run riot sometimes on h3, not g3, to combine an attack on h7. For example, bishop f6, and there's classic threats here, like queen takes h7, rook h3 for mating on h8. So say bishop f8, just to put it on the board here, if a6 already, bang, bang, checkmate. But bishop f8 will put a spanner in the works there, because that wouldn't work because of the bishop h6 defense. It doesn't actually work here because of bishop h6. So, but on bishop f8, still knight f4 is dangerous. And if check, then it doesn't matter. The bishop drops back to f1. And here, this is devastating for the dark squares after d5. That's a loose piece to be exploited in a little bit with rook h3. And now bishop c3 hitting the loose piece and preparing the huge battery queen f6, winning with a winning advantage. So, okay, so anyway, rook e8 was played, so not being tempted by the poison pawn here. And we have bishop c4, so there are certain focal points in the position and common squares potentially building up. So f7, h7, the dark squares. Yeah, the bishops are they're really cooperating with the queen here, potentially, try and do something, these two bishops and that queen. So here we have move h5. If bishop e6, then d5, and after knight a5, just take that because the queen's actually protecting the c4 square. But even better, it's just forgetting that, just going for king here is even better. So that's absolutely crushing. So that's totally out of the question. So h5 is played. And now we have a bit of controversy with this next move. And you might think, well, if this next move is a mistake, then why is this game featured as an example in all these books and all these authors? Why has this game become a conference centre for the attacking players to discuss what went right? Well, I think because chess isn't, it isn't played by supercomputers. So when we have these attacking game examples, we have to take the good and kind of acknowledge the bad of it objectively. And in doing so, we can make use of that to the maximum then. We have to know the up and down sides quite clearly in our mind of these classic game examples. And this is a slight downside mistake of this game, an inaccuracy, but it's also instructive how it should be played in theory. It's a slight mistake because black does have significant pressure on the centre and the e-file. And before we go into bishop f6, how does black actually kind of equalise here? Well, black played a return kind of mistake, rook e4. Okay, how do we do this? Let's look, instead of rook e1, at this point in time, white could enter the dark squares with the form pawn bishop, with bishop f6, and say knight a5 hitting this bishop, then bishop d3, and say bishop e6. It's important here actually not to allow bishop c4, as it turns out, before white gets on with the attack. This little move b3 to stop bishop c4 is actually important. If knight c6 here now, knight g3, and white is ready to smash through the king side, kind of uninterrupted, for example like this, smashing through, it's going to be carnage and destruction. But if white doesn't flick in b3 here, there is significant counterplay opportunity. If queen g5, so without this prophylaxis, bishop c4, believe it or not, and what does white do? If bishop takes f5, rook takes e2, and this is actually survivable, believe it or not, for the black king. It's survivable. It's an equal position. So b3 is an important part of the campaign here, and that will be better. So this is in the bishop f6, knight a5 line, bishop d3, bishop e6. So b3, knight c6, knight g3. And here, so we mentioned originally knight e7. If rook ac8, then there's knight takes h5. If knight b4, knight takes h5. Basically, knight takes h5 is a pretty devastating move. If black ever gives up that bishop, then the queen and bishop are going to run rampant on the dark squares. Like over here and over here, it's a classic form pawn bishop. It's going to be devastating. So, okay, so bishop f6 may have been, it's the technically superior move, it seems, to rook ae1. But rook ae1 was played, and black played rook e4 here. And that seems like a natural tempo gainer on the queen. It does gain a tempo on the queen. It's an attractive move in theory to play. Perhaps better, though, technically, is queen b4, so that's also hitting the bishop here. On bishop b3, rook e4 now is slightly different. Very different. For example, f4, knight takes d4, knight takes, queen takes. And here, black's getting a big advantage. There's no attack. And these pieces seem stuck. There's nothing glamorous here for white to do. So queen b4, maybe white plays instead knight c3. But rook takes, queen takes c4 is this position is winning for white. But let's have a look at that again. Instead of taking the bishop here, let's not allow rook e8. Let's play bishop d7. After bishop f6, queen takes c4 here. And here there's no problem. Bishop f8 guards the dark squares. So yeah, it's interesting. Queen b4 is a real nuisance move, it seems here. The top nuisance move. King f8 instead, just bring the king back. That's the worst move to play. Bishop d7, b3, knight a5. This position looks as though it's pretty dangerous for black. But if the bishop reroutes to g7, it looks as though maybe this with accurate play, this should be okay. That's not accurate play. That's this carnage and destruction. But around here, at this point, because of that pin on f7, here, sorry, around here, instead of rook ac8, bishop b5 to make sure that f6 is hit. So if that actually forcibly encourages bishop takes g7, this should be even. So yeah, there are ways to take out the sting of white's attack. So queen b4 seems to be a key move in this proposition, and there's also other moves like bishop d7, which potentially are just about stabilizing for black. But rook e4 was played, and we have a very necessary move to parry the attack against the queen. Very logical, knight f4, letting d4 seems go. So here, though, black did kind of counter blunder. If we take account of the relative strength of both players, to call it a blunder is you have to take account of the strength of the players when you say blunder. But here, this does seem to be given as a mistake, at least by many authors. This next move, coming up. Queen takes d4 here. It's coming up. If knight takes d4, rook takes e4, and then knight takes h5 shreds the king quite significantly because of this queen h8. So there's nothing for black to do there apart from a few spite checks. And if bishop takes f4 there, rook takes this position is crushing through, crashing because of queen takes f7 and queen g8. So yeah, it's a very dangerous situation. So queen takes d4 was played, rook takes e4, and here is black's mistake. Yeah, this is the position after rook takes e4, how to recapture. Now apparently maybe Najdorf was put off. He didn't want to play queen takes e4 because he felt this endgame after knight takes g6, that pawn's pinned, where the queen's hit. If this endgame he thought was going to be favourable for white, it turns out with modern technology, the engines don't seem to think it's a big deal. This position seems to be about even. So that's the continuation. He should have played this recapture with queen takes e4. So he actually took with the pawn. So game on again for the attacking player here. So we're going to start the tests now. White to play here for 200 points. What does white play in this position, you think? So I'll give you 10 seconds to pause here. From now, white to play here. Okay, yeah, knight takes h5. So g takes was played. If queen takes c4, then knight f6 check, queen h8 check, and actually there's a common square there. Queen e8 is checkmate. Yeah, these pieces are asleep. They can't do anything about e8. So we have g takes, and now bishop f6, and it's a tempo gainer, and it gives g5 for the queen. But also, even more significantly, you might think, because that's tempting with a check, it's actually more lucrative sometimes to just take here for this queen h8 than queen g5, because sometimes the king can run when you use that check. So that's something to bear in mind as well, which is very, very instructive. To check or not to check, that is the question. If you check, the king runs immediately. If you don't, you're going to get the king with this formed bishop here. We have queen c5. So just to put this on the board as an example, queen takes c4, to check or not to check. Queen takes h5 is the best move, looking at queen h8. If king f8, queen h8 is mate. And here it's going to be checkmate. If you played instead queen g5 check, the king runs, the king can run, make a run for it, big advantage for black. So bishop f6, we have queen c5 though, so not just stopping queen g5 but also holding the h pawn. So if only this queen could be distracted away. But for the moment, okay, this next move is a very powerful introduction move to try and put more pressure on black position. guess what white plays here for 200 points? 10 seconds to pause the video here. White play here. Okay, white plays rook d1. This ties down the queen. There's no stuff like queen f5 because the queen's now got an extra responsibility to hold on to that bishop. And also if the bishop moves, you know, sometimes there's going to be rook d8, sometimes, if the bishop's not covering d8. So this is a really awkward move. This rook is embarrassed. Its fellow rook is really participating here for white's attack. Black plays king f8 here. So yeah, if queen f5, we just take on d6. If bishop e6 was played, the rook's also very, very handy here actually with a cunning move. There's the most accurate move in this position is fascinating. If I give you 10 seconds here in this variation, white to play here. Okay, a bit of a disconnection tactic. That's the clue, by the way. If you want to work on your disconnection tactics, as in the internet disconnections, a bit of an analogy, but rook d5 disconnects the line from c5 to g5. So say bishop takes, actually we can play, it's more important is to take the h5 one out to go to h8 rather than check. And if black's best is this, then this runs out of checks. Black's going to get mated. So rook d5 is a real killer move there in this line. So for this, queen takes h5. If bishop d5, by the way, you might think, isn't that sufficient? There's potentially that is there, but black has knight e7. A trick for the defensive player to defend just in time h8. Yeah, and here bishop f8 just in time defense, and that will be very, very annoying. Okay, so black will be doing fine there. So king f8 though was played here because of this perhaps rook d5 crusher move. Now here again the queen is hanging on to these key squares g5 and h5. How can we what's the straw that breaks the camel's back here for the queen protecting g5 and h5? Can you see the straw here? What's the final straw here? What does white play in this position? 10 seconds to pause the video again for 200 points. Okay. It's b4, yes, b4. It's really trying to distract the queen. It's amazing how, yeah, these kind of spectator pieces, though, to be fair, there aren't too many defensive pieces around. Knight takes b4 is played. If queen takes b4, queen takes h5, and that's pretty desperate. Yeah, that's over. So if knight takes b4 is basically, it looks like the only move. If queen takes c4, yeah, queen takes h5, and here rook takes d6 works actually because the queen happens to be having a common square with that rook, critical if black was trying to back row mate white. There's rook d1 here, so that's winning, and then queen h8 mating. So anyway, so knight takes b4, and here is a really, really fantastic move. Really superb, super duper move, emphasizing all sorts of common squares in the position and general weaknesses of the opponent. This next move, again, for 200 points here, what would you play with white? This is why I think we've got to accept this game with its flaws, understand the game's flaws, but the beautiful, strong points of this example are absolutely amazing for the attacking player, for how especially the queen is cooperating with two bishops. For the attack here, this is a really stunning move visually. Okay, queen g3. trying to just get that connection open to d8. So breaking open that connection to d8. Bishop g4 is played here, but also, you know, it's looking at other moves like queen g7, queen f7 look really dangerous. So if bishop takes g3, rook d8 is checkmate. If bishop e7, then queen g7, and then queen takes f7 is checkmate. Or even bishop takes f7 is checkmate there. So bishop g4 interrupting g7 and hitting the rook. So, but it's losing a piece. Rook takes d6. We have knight d3 being played. If queen takes c4, then queen e3 protects the back row, protects against queen c1, and is also looking at attacking via h6. So this is particularly annoying for black that there's no back row trick. Okay, that's lost for black. So we have knight d3. This is snapped off because there's always bishop f1 now to this back row check, which is played. Queen c1, bishop f1. Rook c8. Black has a final trick up his sleeve. Okay. Now, as I say, it's a bit of a flawed masterpiece, this game, because white unfortunately played queen e5. Can you see what black played, which ended the game? No, this might not have happened. Queen takes f1 is the mating threat to be aware of. That it didn't happen there. He didn't mess it up like that. No. There's at least 3 moves for white which don't mess it up here based on these back row tricks. Okay, he played one of them, h3. And yeah, queen takes f1 now was played, so you can't take this because of rook c1 is checkmate. So king h2 gives the king a necessary square. So we're back, materially we're back. Opposite colored bishops was white's absolutely winning now. White's attack is crashing through. For those technically interested, by the way, as well as h3, there was h4 as you might expect, and also there was f3 as well. White is a piece up. As long as he doesn't get mated here, this is actually technically possible. White's a bishop up, but you know, you don't want to play this. You want to play what's played as h3, cozy move. So queen takes f1 check. Just sidestep that with king h2. Okay, and now here queen c1 was played. If bishop e6, the bishop dares go back, then just queen g7 check, and then queen g8 is checkmate. So queen c1, that bishop is taken. Bishop up again, thanks very much, hg. Queen takes g4, it's kind of over. Off the check, there's no perpetual check or anything here. With queen f4, you might think there's some perpetual check potential because that's extinguished with king g3. The king goes to g3, and the bishop is conveniently looking at c3. There's no check on c3. There's no spy check on c3, or is there? Or is there? Hold on. Or is there? Because the queen is pinning against the rook. Yes, in fact, black did play rook c3 check, but white didn't indulge that. White played f3 here. Didn't indulge bishop takes, queen takes d6. Just f3, and the game actually ended here. A lot of tricks in this game, a lot of ideas, a lot of cooperation between the two bishops and the queen, a lot of back row tricks in particular to manage at the same time. But here it's absolutely now winning. There's a threat of rook d8 checkmate. So if e takes, rook d8 is checkmate. If rook c8, then there's queen takes c8 checkmate. Rook can't go back there. If queen g6, again rook d8 is checkmate. So there's really no defense after f3 here. So anyway, despite losing this classic game, I believe it was Najdorf that won the Mulder Plata in 1942, ahead of Stolberg and Pilnik. But this was a classic encounter. These are two of the now very, very strongest Argentinian players two of the strongest logicians meet in this great battle in 1942. Really classic, instructive game example. So the Art of Attack has these fantastic examples, but it's up to you to see the upsides and downsides, to give great scrutiny to these examples, to get the best from them to use in your own games, I believe. So, but there's fantastic video commentary on this and other games if you want to check out the Art of Attack chess course by Grandmaster Simon Williams. So he does a fantastic job there looking at these games and bringing together the other perspectives that other people have made. This game is almost like a conference game for the attacking player. John Nunn's been involved, other players have been involved in the commentary. It's just a very much talked about game. Its flaws actually make it kind of beautiful and very unique as well. Okay, hope you got something from that. Comments, questions, likes, subscribes, all appreciated. Thanks so much.
Every battle is won by preparation. We've taken one of the most popular chess books ever written and rewired it for the modern player. The Art of Attack. Learn with Chessable's state-of-the-art move trainer technology, presented by myself, Grandmaster Simon Williams. I'll talk you through 29 hours worth of educational video content. From attacking the uncastled king, bishop sacrifices, diagonal attacks, and classic pawn storms. Paint your opponent's king into a corner with the Art of Attack.